You know, when you look at the Middle East, the headlines just paint this picture of endless conflict and chaos. It's a lot, right? It feels like this impossible puzzle with way too many pieces. But what if we could actually look under the hood? Well, today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to unpack the deep structural reasons behind all that volatility.
It's the question, isn't it? The one so many of us ask when we're watching the news. And it's really easy to fall back on those simple, kind of misleading answers like, oh, they've always been fighting. But the real story, well, it's way more complex and honestly, way more interesting. The instability we see today wasn't inevitable. It was literally built that way.
Okay, so how are we going to tackle this? We've got a roadmap. First, we'll look at how the modern Middle East was literally drawn on a map. Then, we'll get into the powerful forces of oil and regional competition. After that, we'll bust some big myths about identity, look at the looming crises that are going to define its future, and finally, see how this all fits into a new global power struggle. All right, let's jump in. All right, first up, the blueprint. And man, was it flawed. To really understand the cracks in the foundation of the modern Middle East, we got to rewind the clock about 100 years, to the exact moment the old order fell apart and a new one was forced on it from the outside.
So, get this. For 400 years, the Ottoman Empire had this system for managing its super diverse population called the millet system. Under this setup, you weren't primarily Syrian or Iraqi. Nope. You were part of a religious community: Sunni, Shia, Christian, Jewish. Each group kind of ran its own show, handling stuff like marriages and legal issues. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. The whole thing gets thrown out the window when the Europeans show up and force their model of a nation-state on everyone, cramming different groups together behind new, artificial borders.
Okay, this is where it gets just wild. It lays bare the incredible double dealing at the heart of this whole process. During World War I, Britain made 3 promises that were completely impossible to keep at the same time. In 1915, they told the Arabs, hey, help us fight the Ottomans, and you'll get a huge independent kingdom. Just a year later, they secretly made a deal with France to slice up that exact same land for themselves. And then, for good measure, in 1917, they tossed in another promise to support a Jewish national home in Palestine. I mean, it was a guaranteed recipe for disaster.
And here's what you get. After the war, the colonial powers made it official. They literally took a ruler and drew straight lines on a map, lines that served their own interests, not the people who lived there. And Iraq is the textbook case. They just smashed together 3 totally separate Ottoman regions, the Kurdish north, the Sunni Arab center, and the Shia Arab south, and called it a country. It was built to be unstable from day one. Okay, so we've got a messed up blueprint. Now let's talk about the fuel that's been poured on this fire for decades. This section is all about the engine that drives so much of the region's politics: oil, power, and fierce rivalries.
So, if you want to understand the politics of the Gulf, there is one key idea you have to get your head around: the rentier state. It's a simple concept with huge consequences. Most countries, right, they run on taxes from their citizens. But a rentier state gets most of its cash by renting out its natural resources, in this case, oil and gas, to the rest of the world.
And here's why that matters so much. You know that famous saying, no taxation without representation? Well, this system completely flips that on its head. If the government doesn't need your tax money to run the country, then it doesn't really need to give you a say in how things are run. Instead of political rights, these regimes can often buy everyone's loyalty by handing out generous subsidies and government jobs. It's a totally different kind of social contract. And just so we're clear, the amount of money we're talking about here is just mind-blowing. The Gulf states alone control almost half of the entire world's proven oil reserves. That doesn't just make them incredibly rich, it gives them enormous global power and makes their stability a big deal for all of us.
All that money, it fuels this massive regional power struggle, basically a new Cold War. So you've got 2 main camps. On one side, you have Saudi Arabia, which sees itself as the leader of the Sunni world. On the other, you have Iran leading the Shia bloc. But here's the thing, they almost never fight each other directly. Instead, they basically turn other countries like Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon into their battlegrounds, funding and arming different sides in what we call proxy wars.
Okay, this leads us to something super important, something we really need to clear up. We hear this phrase all the time: ancient hatreds, especially between Sunnis and Shias, being the reason for all the conflict. But that's a huge oversimplification, and honestly, it's a dangerous one.
This quote, this just nails it. It's not some ancient, unchanging hatred that's driving all this. It's modern struggles for power and influence. So these religious tensions, they're not the cause of the fight. They're the weapon used in the fight.
So how does that actually work? Well, leaders can stir up religious identity to get people fired up for their proxy wars. They can paint a political enemy as a religious enemy to make them seem illegitimate. They use it to split up protest movements at home and to justify cracking down on dissent. It's cynical, for sure, but man, is it an effective playbook for staying in power.
Okay, so we've talked geopolitics, but bubbling just under the surface are these massive internal pressures building up across the region. Honestly, these are the real ticking time bombs that are going to shape the Middle East for the next generation.
First up, people. A whole lot of young people. I mean, check this out. A staggering 60% of the entire population in the region is under 30. Now that could be a huge asset, an engine for growth. But when you've got high unemployment, it's basically a demographic powder keg. And there's actually a word for what millions of these young people are going through: waithood. It's this frustrating limbo where you're technically an adult, but you can't get a job, you can't afford to get married, you just can't start your life. And that feeling, that deep frustration, was exactly what lit the fuse for the Arab Spring uprisings back in 2011.
But you know, the biggest threat, it might not be what you expect. For a region that's famous for its oil, the real, long-term, existential crisis isn't oil. It's water. The Middle East is the most water-scarce place on the planet, and that's creating a whole new kind of conflict called hydropolitics. And listen, this isn't some far-off, futuristic problem. This is happening right now. You've got major tensions flaring up between Egypt and Ethiopia over a new dam on the Nile River. Same thing between Turkey, Syria, and Iraq over the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. You hear that saying that the next wars will be fought over water? Well, in the Middle East, that's not a saying. It's a real possibility.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together. We've got messed-up borders, oil politics, identity used as a weapon, and these huge crises just waiting to explode. And all of that chaos, it's turned the region into a giant chessboard for the world's superpowers.
You see, for a long time, the U.S. was pretty much the main outside player calling the shots. But those days are changing. As American influence has pulled back a bit, a power vacuum has opened up, and other big players, like Russia and China, are eagerly jumping in to push their own interests. The whole area has become this arena where the rivalries of a new, multipolar world are playing out in real time.
And that leaves us with one last massive question. 100 years ago, European powers drew lines in the sand that defined the modern Middle East and basically set the stage for a century of conflict. Now, in our world of shifting power, we have to ask, who's holding the pen this time? Who gets to draw the next lines in the sand? And what will that mean for the next 100 years?